According to Jakob Kramer, an Austrian specialist in the study of the resurrection, by far most scholars hold firmly to the reliability of the biblical statements about the empty tomb. Fact number 2. On separate occasions, different individuals and groups saw appearances of Jesus alive after his death. According to the prominent New Testament critic Gert Ludemann, it may be taken as historically certain that the disciples had experiences after Jesus' death in which Jesus appeared to them as the risen Christ. These appearances were witnessed not only by believers, but also by unbelievers, skeptics, and even enemies. Fact number 3. The original disciples suddenly came to believe in the resurrection of Jesus, despite every predisposition to the contrary. Jews had no belief in a dying, much less rising, Messiah, and Jewish beliefs about the afterlife precluded anyone's rising from the dead to immortality before the end of the world. Nevertheless, the original disciples came to believe so strongly that God had raised Jesus from the dead that they were willing to go to their deaths in attestation to this belief. N.T. Wright, an eminent New Testament scholar, concludes, "That is why, as an historian, I cannot explain the rise of early Christianity unless Jesus rose again, leaving an empty tomb behind him." Attempts to explain away these 3 great facts, like the disciples stole the body or Jesus wasn't really dead, have been universally rejected among contemporary scholarship. The simple fact is that there just is no plausible, naturalistic explanation of these 3 facts. And therefore it seems to me that Christian is amply justified in believing that Jesus rose from the dead and was who he claimed to be. But that entails that God exists. And thus we have a good inductive argument for the existence of God based on the resurrection of Jesus. Premise 1. There are 3 established facts concerning the fate of Jesus: his empty tomb, his post-mortem appearances, and the origin of the disciples' belief in his resurrection. 2. The hypothesis God raised Jesus from the dead is the best explanation of these facts. 3. The hypothesis God raised Jesus from the dead entails that the God revealed by Jesus exists. 4. Therefore, the God revealed by Jesus exists. Finally, number 5, God can be personally known and experienced. This isn't really an argument for God's existence. Rather, it's the claim that you can know that God exists wholly apart from arguments, simply by personally experiencing him. This was the way people in the Bible knew God. As Professor John Hick explains, God was known to them as a dynamic will, interacting with their own wills, a sheer given reality, as inescapably to be reckoned with as destructive storm and life-giving sunshine. To them, God was not an idea adopted by the mind, but an experienced reality which gave significance to their lives. Now, if this is so, then there's a real danger that arguments for God could actually distract our attention from God himself. If you're sincerely seeking God, then God will make his existence evident to you. The Bible promises, draw near to God, and he will draw near to you. We mustn't so focus on the external arguments that we fail to hear the inner voice of God speaking to our own hearts. For those who listen, God becomes an immediate reality in their lives. In conclusion, then, we've seen 5 good reasons to think that God exists. 1, God is the best explanation of the origin of the universe. 2, God is the best explanation of the fine-tuning of the universe for intelligent life. 3, God is the best explanation of objective moral values in the world. 4, God is the best explanation of the historical facts concerning the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus. And 5, God can be personally known and experienced. If Dr. De Sousa wants us to believe that God does not exist, then he must first tear down all 5 of the reasons that I've presented and then in their place erect a case of his own to prove that God does not exist. Unless and until he does that, I think that belief in God is the more plausible worldview.
All right. I will in fact do what Mr. Craig has suggested, but I'm not allowed to do it now because I had to promise not to anticipate any of his arguments, and of course since I hadn't heard them, that was easy to do, except accidentally. And accidents, of course, are indeed very important. What I will do, in fact, is give you 4 reasons against God, not just against the existence of God, but 4 reasons for thinking that the question is either meaningless or has a clearly negative answer. First of all, that everything that you need God to explain, you can explain without him. Secondly, that when you want to believe rationally, you must not be preoccupied with comfort or what it seems right, but only with what's true. Thirdly, that as a matter of fact, the God of the Bible is an evil bully. Fourthly, that life is in fact far grander and more wonderful and more beautiful if you get rid of this ancient primitive hypothesis. Let's start then with a kind of inversion of a classic proof. I couldn't attribute it to Professor Craig, even if I thought he'd go to use it because I wasn't allowed to, but I'm actually going to show you that the very definition of God entails that God does not exist. Why? Well, God, on this classic proof, is that being that which no greater can be conceived. Now, if you're comparing two things and one can do all kinds of things without needing some help, then that one is stronger than the other one who needs some sort of help. Now, therefore, if God existed, you could imagine a God even bigger than that one, the God who wouldn't even need to exist in order to do all these wonderful things. Well, maybe you think this is a joke. You haven't read much theology if you think theologians are not capable of arguments that sound very much like that. But, in fact, there is a theological argument that says that you can't apply any predicates to God because, being infinite, he is so much above anything you could dream that God is not good, God is not great, God is not kind. He's something else altogether and no words can convey. You only have to add this one thing. So, God does not exist either. Okay. But really what matters is that indeed, people have always believed in gods. And then they decided too many was too many, and so they believed in just 2, that was many theism. And then they said, oh, well, why 2? Let's just have 1. In fact, let's have one who's just perfect and wonderful. And that was an obvious reaction to the awfulness of life, to the fact that the gods are so vicious that they've spent that the entire history of the world is a history of carnage. So, scary guy, God. Let's pretend we think he's nice, and maybe he'll be a little nicer to us. Now, in fact, I think that science and religion, at first, are not opposed. Both come from exactly the same roots in 2 respects. In respect of their emotional and in respect of their explanatory nature. The emotions that are likely to be generated by looking at the world are that if there is a God, he's capricious, cruel, and very scary. Right? If you find it scary, then it might be a good idea to say, well, no, actually there's a really nice one. And he's going to be the answer to all these problems. But the scientific approach is to say, well, actually, it's more beautiful if you think of it as just being due to random events, to chance and necessity, without any intelligent designer.